Hi, and welcome back to the layout. Today I'm really excited to have been given the opportunity to collaborate with both a model railroad manufacturer, that's Arrowhead Models, and a hobby shop, Lombard Hobbies, to help announce an all-new freight car in HO scale. And that's a Greenville 2494 RailGon Gondola. The car was officially announced yesterday, but today we're going to be talking a little bit about how to weather this car and some really unique aspects of this car. To name a few, it has 199 total parts. 81 of those parts are wire and 34 of them are brass, so it's a brass plastic hybrid, and it also includes brass side panels. And if you're thinking what I've been thinking, for a gondola, this creates a really unique and interesting opportunity to create some dented side panels. So it's definitely a little bit of a tricky challenge to do it, but I'm going to show that to you in this video. But before we get to the weathering and the body modifications to make this look like the real thing, a little bit more information about the model. You can learn a little bit more information about this car on the Lombard Hobbies Facebook page, where you can watch the live announcement that happened yesterday, and the owner of Arrowhead Models, Blaine Hadfield, will tell you a little bit more about how this car is produced and some really cool features about it, like the details of the paint scheme. I thought that was a neat one, where it's not just road name specific details on the paint, but even road number specific, where all the dimensional and load data printed onto the car are specific to the individual road number. And speaking of road names and road numbers, of note, the CSX cars pictured in this video are all available exclusively through Lombard Hobbies, so you can pre-order those through lombardhobbies.com, and they'll be arriving very shortly. So I'll put a link to that in the description. But for now, let's go ahead and get started with the weathering. This has been an incredibly fun car for me to weather because I've always wanted to bow out the sides of a gondola, and we're finally able to do that with the new brass-sided car from Arrowhead Models. However, I want to give you a quick word of caution before we begin, and that is that it does take a little bit of force to bend the brass, and there is a good chance from all the methods that I've tried, and I've tried 4 different methods because I've had a couple cars to do this on and did a different one on each side. There is a good chance that some of the finer detail parts might break off. So I just want to say that this isn't the official instruction guide on how to weather this car. These are just some tips and tricks that I have found to be helpful as I try to bow out these sides. And in my mind, even though we did end up breaking a few detail parts, they were easy to glue back on, and we had to repaint a few things. That was okay too, because at the end of the day, we had a great looking car, and the end result was far outweighed a few of the parts that might have broken off and we had to put back on. So it's just a word of caution. If you're not comfortable with this, I would encourage you to maybe try it on a car that's not quite as nice. This is an incredibly detailed car, so either try it on something that's not as nice first, or maybe just skip ahead to the weathering itself, which will still give you an incredible looking car. This is just a neat little extra step that was kind of begging to be done, and I wanted to give it a shot, so that's what I'm going to talk about first. So what I did here was create a little bracing. You can see I cut a little piece of styrene to go on the side of the car, and then I also used some electrical tape to go around the whole outside of the car. That does 2 things. One, it holds the bracing, which we're going to hammer against, down and to the side of the car, and it also holds the car together. I wasn't really sure how the car was going to respond while we're hammering it, so I thought, giving a little bit of extra strength is going to help. The side panels itself, like I said, are made out of brass, but there's 3 separate brass sheets. So I used 2 little clamps to hold the corners of those brass sheets down, because I found that as you do hammer in the sides and bow them out, while it really creates a realistic effect, it also bows up the entire brass panel, which includes 4 of the individual panels between the ribs of the car. So I think it's better here to clamp them down, and you'll see, even with clamping it, we weren't completely able to hold that piece of brass down, and unfortunately it comes out. I haven't found a way to do it yet, but I'm sure maybe some people will be able to find one. For me, I really couldn't think of one. So anyways, this is what I'm doing. I'm using just a hammer and a little chisel there to slowly, very gently, as much as you can be gentle with a hammer, bow out the sides. And so each one probably takes, a minute or 2, and then we're going to come back and do the next panel. And a neat thing here is there's actually rivets on the inside of the car where you can see where all of the ribs are. So that way you can tell exactly where the middle of the panel is in between the ribs, and where to chisel and hammer and really bend that brass out. I wanted to do a couple different techniques for bending out the brass. You can do a long, big, generalized kind of bow out from just repeated use, or you can do a couple of good, single location repeated hits to kind of create an effect where it looks like maybe one big thing hit the side of the car and bowed it out there. So you'll notice, especially as you look at the final pictures of this car, that it's really a combination of all those different types. And this is exactly what I was talking about. I could not find a way to create this effect without the brass piece itself bowing up. So I actually found the best thing to do is to pull the brass piece out. In hammering it, it came out mostly by itself anyways, and it really didn't damage the paint too much. You can see there's a couple of chips there. We'll go back and touch that up a little bit later, but like I previously said, in my mind, it was well worth a little bit of the damage to the paint and having this come out to create that really cool effect, which you're really unable to get with any other car on the market today. So I straightened it out. Next time I use a little bit of CA glue to put it back in place. So I ended up taking off the whole side panel of the car, and it comes off relatively easily. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this, but I found it was easier to take the side panels off, straighten them out, and then glue them back onto the plastic side frame. So you can see here I'm using a little bit of CA glue to glue those flattened brass side panels back onto the car once they've already been bowed out, kind of like how you want them to go. So you can see I'm going to make sure that I have the panel oriented in the correct location and orientation, because I want to make sure that the writing is up. And then once I laid it down here, I realized that it wasn't completely flat, so I quickly took it back out, flattened it out, and I'm going to give it a little bit of pressure for about a few seconds to really just hold it in place while it glues. And then once that's set, we'll come back and put the side panel and side of the car back onto the main frame and really glue everything back together. You can also see here from the repeated chiseling and hammering that quite a bit of paint on the inside of the car broke off. I didn't really think that was much of a problem though, because it's black anyways. So just painting the whole thing black again a second time was fine. And I actually realized that it came out to be a really cool effect because it looked like multiple layers of old paint. So it was one of those things which was an accident, but in my mind turned out to be a really cool effect, which I thought looked pretty neat. So I'm going to put a little bit of CA glue back on the side panels of the car. Right above the truck bolsters on the side, there's two little metal tabs which will fit right into the side of the car. And then there's a couple little side tabs as well which fit onto the ribs, the horizontal ribs at the end of the car. And then there's one more tab for the top sill of the car, which is in a different orientation. So it's a little bit, you have to play with a little bit to get the sides of the car back in, but once you see how it's designed, it goes back together quite easily. And a couple, I would just recommend that you take your time, and you can see once it's all glued on, I'm just going to turn it onto this side and apply a little bit of pressure, mainly closer to the bottom of the car here, so I'm not denting in and breaking the other side of the car. But I'm going to do this to really glue it in place and make sure that it's level and secure as the glue dries. Next, I mentioned that chiseling the brass, does cause the side panels on the outside to chip a little bit. So I just mixed a little bit of paint. The car is already pre-faded, so I just mixed a little bit of white paint with yellow paint to create that faded yellow, touched up a little bit of the brass side panels on the bottom and sides, and then went back with a black mixed with white to touch up a little bit of the black on the outside of the car as well. For the inside, I just repainted the whole thing. This was a flat black, and you'll see in a few of the finished photos, like I was previously talking about, what a neat effect it really gives you. A really neat 3D textured effect on the inside when you repaint over the factory paint that's been chipped and the bare brass itself. So with the side panels dented and bowed out, we're now going to begin the weathering. And this is without a doubt my favorite weathering technique. I use it on all sorts of freight cars and locomotives, and it's great because it's easy. Anybody can do it. You don't need an airbrush. And I wanted to weather this car without using an airbrush because I know a lot of people don't have access to one or aren't familiar with how to use it. So this is just a really simple technique which yields some incredible results. This is weathering powders. This is just a black weathering powder applied with a fairly big brush that's also pretty loose. I'm going to cover the entire side of the car, overly heavy. I'm going to make it look like it, in my mind, is a little bit too heavy. Then I'm going to come back with a paper towel, dip it in a little bit of water, which I have in a spray can lid, and just squeegee that out so it's just damp. Then I'm going to actually remove some of the weathering powders which I've already applied. And the reason that we're removing the weathering powder that we just applied is because it leaves some of the weathering powders on the surface itself, but mainly in the cracks and crevices of the car, and it really highlights the detail and also looks like kind of a weathering wash and gives you a neat grime and dirt in the corners and cracks and crevices of the car. And if you look at prototype pictures of not only this gondola but just freight cars in general, you'll notice that they have very similar weathering techniques or characteristics. So that's what we're trying to recreate here, and this is just a neat way to do that. Once we've gone over the entire side of the car with a damp paper towel, I'm going to come back with a dry one. This is going to help blend it together because occasionally you'll get a little water droplet here or there which will dry around. It doesn't quite look right. And it also just dries it so that we can go ahead and apply a clear coat to seal everything in. And I'm using clear coat and dull coat interchangeably here, but once this dries, I'm going to go over it and add a quick dull coat to make sure everything is sealed in. But as you can see, it really creates a nice looking effect. And with the factory paint that's already dulled down and faded, you don't have to do any fading. It's almost a pre-weathered car minus the weathering powders here. So a really nice touch on the paint there from Arrowhead models. I'm going to do the same things to the ends, and that really highlights a lot of the details of the grab irons and ribs and that little brass sheet there at the end as well that shows the detail. Another thing I wanted to show you, I wanted to give you guys options as I weather this car. If you didn't want to touch up the paint with black, you could touch it up with rust. I noticed that a lot of the prototype pictures of this car have rust on the side panels from just repeated use and exposure to the elements. So that's another thing you can do. And then here I went back and repainted a little bit of the RailGon logo with just a fine yellow brush. I'm going to repeat the same technique here where I cover the car with grimy black weathering powder. Use a damp paper towel to remove most of it on the big surfaces, and then come back with a dry paper towel to blend it all together and remove any water droplets. Lastly, I wanted to show you how to weather a car without the bowed out sides because I wanted you to know that it still looks good in my opinion. So this is going to be on our layout and accompany the other two cars, and it's nice to have a little bit of variation and also just to know that you don't have to bow out the sides to make this car look good. So I'm going to use the same weathering technique with the weathering powder, damp paper towel, and then a dry paper towel like I showed you before to finish up this car. And once all three of them are done and clear coated and dull coated, we can then go back and finish up a few little final details here and there to get them ready for the layout and really finished up. And that's going to be the trucks and the wheels. We need to weather those a little bit. But before we do that, we're going to weather the inside of the gondolas as well. You can see the bowed out side panels are really starting to show up nicely. And by adding just a little bit of rust and brown to the inside of the gondola is really going to help highlight that further, especially since these cars are so open and anybody looking at them will be able to see the bowed out sides from the inside of the car as well. So using a little bit of rusty brown weathering powder, I'm just going to very generously apply it to the inside of the car, blow away any loose material, and then blend it together. We can see here the outside and inside difference in the bowed out sides. I'm going to use a little bit of dark brown paint mixed with black to create an even darker brown to paint the wheels, and I'll just spin them with my thumb as I use the other hand to hold a brush and paint the wheels, so no need to take them out of the trucks. Then for the trucks themselves, I'm just going to do a dry brushing technique. They're already weathered a little bit. Just the dull coat has already dulled them down to kind of a grayish black. Adding just a little touch of brown is really going to help highlight those and bring them out. So you can see here the dented sides and bowed out sides really create a nice looking effect. And once everything comes together on this car, it creates an incredibly realistic effect. And you can see here on the weathering in particular, with the rusted sides versus the repainted sides, it almost gives a really neat 3D texture, something I think came out almost accidental, but really cool. So that was just a repainted side over the bare brass where it had chipped, and then the weathering wash with the damp paper towel on top of that to create that neat 3D effect, like this car that's going by the camera now. So all three of these cars really came out each very differently, but each really neat, and creates an incredibly realistic and prototypical gondola that has never been able to be done in HO scale before. So huge props to Arrowhead Models for producing this incredible car, and also a huge thanks to Lombard Hobbies for collaborating with them to bring this car to the market and to announce it. They're great guys, and I completely support and love the hobby shop there, so glad to see them doing this, and I'm really excited and thankful to them to be part of this. So as always guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time, and have a great day.